The exchange formula yields to a presence formula, mutual branches and responsibility contours become permanent fabric, not a one-off diplomatic project you fold away after the photo. The deeper that fabric, the higher the price of desync, command, court, and technical contour must read one signal, or failure becomes politics faster than any manifesto. The mission moves into protocol containment, a shared crisis order held by neutral arbitration and verifiable access rules. Closed protocol room. In the center there is a hologram with layers of the astral, void and external nodes. Behind the frosted glass of the protocol wing, a night shift of technicians passes, replacement comm blocks on carts, access marks on sleeves, fatigue on faces that belong to no grand principle. The external nodes on the hologram blink not as ornament, but as an extension of that invisible work.
You both want system compatibility, but are afraid of losing sovereignty. So, start with boundaries, not access.
Zel Naga sweeps a palm along the divider on the compatibility schematic in the protocol hall. The mediator opens with boundaries before either side argues access keys.
The boundaries have already been marked. The EFLs are not included in the void.
Kelvin points at the crisis assessment rim on the void map. For the Reich, the line that the EFLs do not enter the void is not bargaining stock but the premise of the talk.
And Mirrodin does not receive direct entry into the closed circuits of the astral.
Titan layers the mirror ban on the same schematic. Mirrodin's direct entry into the astral's closed circuits balances the Reich's void clause.
Principle: exchange only through external nodes, verifiable indicators, and mirror event logs. The inspection schedule for the cycle isn't an appendix to the paper. It's part of the same commitment.
Zel Naga pulls 3 external nodes in paired mirror logs onto the center screen. Exchange without direct penetration rests on indicators both sides can recheck. The mediator drags the inspection calendar out of the appendix into the protocol body. Without cyclic verification, the signature stays a one-day declaration.
Repeated verification is not for elegance. Without it, each side will again start treating its closed truth as higher than the shared risk.
Kelvin marks assent beside the schedule. He knows how fast a correct text turns hollow without repeatable verification.
Mirror transparency. You see our critical risks, we see yours.
Zel Naga splits 2 risk layers on the shared table. Mirror transparency means neither side reads the other's critical contour blind.
One-sided trust does not live in such systems. It quickly turns into the right of the strong to watch without being seen.
Kelvin does not argue symmetry. For him in the protocol hall, one-sided trust is a structure that fails before the first routing glitch. Kelvin's line about symmetric trust hooks Zel Naga back to the Trasm colony, where symmetry was tested not by declarations but by whether the gate close register and the evacuation register matched. Otherwise pretty symmetry turned bodily asymmetric. Trasm, 2 registers on one screen, military and civilian. Zel Naga refuses to call evacuation complete until both lines match.
The civilian chain lags by a minute.
Then the minute goes into the register as risk, not as the sector's internal matter.
Zel Naga carries Trasm's logic to the table. A minute's divergence is already register risk, not a private reading, so 2 interpretations of one threat must close through arbitration, not rhetorical symmetry.
And we add an arbitration circuit in case of divergent interpretations regarding the same threat.
Zel Naga draws an arbitration circuit between 2 columns interpreting the same threat. A fight over signal meaning must not end in mutual accusation. After the main part of the session, only the 2 principals and the agreed access boundary hologram remain in the hall. The technical frame is already agreed, and the conversation moves to the heavier question: what political cost must be paid for an institution that has to survive its first serious failure without rolling back into old reflexes?
If this protocol fails, we will be accused not merely of error. They will say the Reich and the Empire built a security display to close their eyes more conveniently.
Kelvin looks at the draft signature. Accountability for failure here is measured not in wording but in the charge of an illusion of security.
Therefore, we consolidate it not as a one-time measure, but as a permanent layer of risk management.
Titan slides the one-time measure block into archive and leaves a permanent risk management layer on the table. The protocol must outlast a crisis turnover, not one negotiation round.
Then we introduce an annual revision of the protocol with the right of both parties to change access parameters.
Kelvin opens the annual revision line. The right to change access parameters once a year keeps the text from freezing in someone else's threat picture.
And a mandatory public report on the results of the audit, so that trust is built on facts, and not on statements.
Titan insists on a public post-audit report. Without facts on the storefront, trust becomes another press line statement.
Thus, the mediator circuit will become an institution, and not a figure of the moment.
Kelvin records acceptance. The mediator circuit in the hall must outlive the mediator's personality and become an institution, not a figure of one day. After the political frame is locked, the team immediately transfers the discussion into the arbitration layer, where trust must be given not a slogan but a procedure. The evening block is no longer about whether agreement is possible in principle, but about how to hold it under the first serious divergence in deadlines, roles, and rights of review without losing governability. Arbitration room. On the table is the protocol for neutral incident review.
If branches start a dispute about a routing failure, who makes the final decision?
Irma turns the talk to branch disputes over a routing failure without an answer on who issues the final finding. A trade node stalls in double interpretation.
We need a technical verdict that both sides accept without political bargaining.
Lay sets a route schematic with two diverging logs on the table. A technical verdict is needed where political bargaining has already eaten supply time.
Create a triple board, one Reich expert, one Miradina, and one neutral Bionicle.
Zel Naga marks 3 seats on the board: a Reich expert, a Miradin expert, and a neutral Bionicle must deliver a verdict owned by neither headquarters.
And the timing?
Irma halts the draft on an empty deadlines row. Without a calendar, the board becomes endless. We will consider
72 hours for preliminary report, 10 days for final decision. Otherwise, trade lines freeze.
Zel Naga writes in 72 hours and 10 days, trade lines will not wait while the board finishes quoting procedure.
Let's add an interpretation rule. The forecast sets the decision window, but does not replace political choice.
Irma traces the forecast band on the screen. The decision window from the model must not replace the table's political choice.
Right. A forecast is only useful when translated into a specific time-based action.
Lays moves that action tag on the timescale. A forecast without an hour attached stays a pretty curve for a report.
Then we add a range of uncertainty to each forecast so as not to pass off probability as fact.
Irma opens an uncertainty funnel around the point forecast. Probability cannot be served to branches as an accomplished fact.
This will reduce political decisions made on the illusion of absolute accuracy.
Lays nods at the narrowed decision corridor. Without a range, politics will fire again on a precise number that never existed.
And we introduce double confirmation based on external data before launching strict measures.
Irma pulls 2 independent external channels. Strict measures do not launch until a second contour confirms the first. On Irma's wording about double confirmation from external data before strict measures, she flashes for an instant to the Savannah contour classroom. The first rule there was separating a record another node could verify from a speaker's handsome certainty. Savannah, Senior Trainees Auditorium. 2 guilds brought conflicting registers for the same incident on receiving side territory.
External confirmation isn't for procedural prettiness. It's so the node holder node has a figure your convenient language can't swap out.
Then we don't launch strict measures without the second node.
Irma leaves the Savannah classroom with one rule for this hall: external confirmation isn't procedural ornament, it's the condition under which strict measures may launch at all. In the negotiating hall, the hologram still holds an external nodes layer, but now Irma traces the line between a record and what a foreign register can recheck. Zel Naga catches the motion and wordlessly moves a palm toward the appeals row, as if asking whether there is room enough for a second source.
If the node holder node argues with itself, external confirmation becomes ornament. We fix in the protocol, second node, not a recommendation, but a condition.
Zel Naga underlines the protocol line: the second node is mandatory, or the node holder will turn external confirmation into ornament for its own register.
Then the warning language changes too. Not "we'll try to align," but "alignment failed, action does not launch."
Irma strikes the softening phrase from the template: the warning must read as a launch ban, not a promise to try.
And a separate line for when the second node is silent not by whim, but by outage. Otherwise, a formal ban becomes an excuse for the security services.
Lays adds a line on second node outage: silence from a break must not be confused with whim, or the security services will bypass the ban formally.
Silence without a cause tag is also risk. We log it before the dispute, not after.
Irma opens the common register on a blank cause tag. Silence without a tag is logged before dispute, or arbitration starts with an erased trail. The preliminary contour seal clicks on the table. The paper trail is still shorter than the digital quarrel, but it sets the tempo. Who names the verification window before both sides start trading versions?
Enough. Arbitration survives politics only if procedure outruns legend.
Zel Naga closes the external confirmation block on the table. Arbitration survives politics only where procedure outruns legend, not chases it in the press ribbon. Once the baseline arbitration frame is agreed, attention shifts to the most conflict-prone element of any procedure: the right to review a decision. In the archive's quiet, the core risk is obvious: Without a clear appeal route, even a neutral verdict quickly turns into a new point of mutual distrust. Zel Naga traces a finger along the projection edge. In the appeals layer, two identical complaints surface from different sectors, one stamped urgent, the other without a time tag. Irma logs the difference in a draft, and for a second the hall stops being a set of pretty principles. The table holds the question of who will first name the node address for recheck.
If the node address hides behind confidential, the second register stays decor.
The mediator traces the word confidential on the route schematic. A hidden node address leaves the second register decor, and the mirror reads one side again.
Then we put a mandatory appeal route line in the protocol. Without it, appeal turns into philosophy.
Irma writes a mandatory appeal route line into the protocol body. Without it, appeal stays philosophy for anyone downstream who cannot see where to carry a copy.
And let it sound rough to the node holder. Without a route, people downstream hear not law, but a promise of a telegram.
Lace points at the lower tier of the node schematic. Without a route, people downstream hear not law but a promise of a telegram that may never arrive. Irma nods briefly, like a signature on her own thought. While the top argues about acceptable procedural beauty, the bottom is already looking for where to carry the error into a register.
Without an appeal mechanism, any arbitration will quickly become a source of new conflict.
Irma opens a blank appeal block in the draft. Without a challenge mechanism, arbitration at the perimeter becomes a new conflict faster than the board can close a case. On Irma's wording about the right of appeal, she flashes back to receiving side audits where appeal was mistaken for polite correspondence until an external node produced a figure you couldn't erase with tone of authority. Reich Frontier Belt, Irma Legal Audit Office, two guilds dispute license interpretation for the same server until the dispute moves to external confirmation. It is already politics.
That's internal regulation.
Internal regulation ends where a checkable line begins for people downstream.
Irma collapses the audit memory into a line for negotiations. While the dispute hides behind internal regulation, the harmed node still lacks a figure. Zel Naga hears that as the need for two appeal stages, not polite mail. Irma slides the draft stack to the table edge. On the top sheet, internal is crossed out, and next to it a pencil line for the meeting reads checkable corridor. Zel Naga holds her gaze on the crossed out word for a second. As on a wound you cannot patch with a new term. Lise quietly speaks the node number from the bottom line of the complaint aloud, not for the record, but to check the address exists in the common registry, not only in the node holder's internal perimeter. Irma nods, barely visible, until the node is named publicly. Appeal stays correspondence among polite people.
On receiving side territory, that sounds like an insult to lawyers. In practice, you're offering them less elegance and more responsibility for the line.
Lays slides the decorative regulation cover off the table. Receiving side lawyers will hear insult, but in practice they are offered responsibility for the line, not elegance of wording.
It is easier for a lawyer to defend a regulation than to admit the regulation has already become politics for everyone downstream.
Irma draws her pen along the gap between defending a regulation and admitting politics downstream. For a branch, the regulation has long ceased to be abstraction and become someone's power.
Then two stages aren't a concession to procedural aesthetics, a way to keep a node from losing a copy of the decision between stages.
Zel Naga splits two appeal stages on the screen, not procedural aesthetics, but insurance so a node does not lose a decision copy in the gap between stages.
The copy of the decision goes into the register not, when possible, but in the same packet as first stage notice. Otherwise delay gets to call itself procedure again.
Irma binds the first stage notice packet to the decision copy in the common register, otherwise delay will call itself procedure again and the node keeps no text between stages. The map layer in the hall dims for a second, only protocol text and three voices remain, no longer trading wording but splitting the delivery time of meaning.
We create a two-stage model: technical appeal and final legal verification.
Zel Naga locks the two-stage model on the center screen. Technical appeal and final legal verification share one line but do not collapse into one handsome phrase.
And there is a strict deadline for appeal, so that it is not profitable for the parties to delay the decision.
Irma writes a hard appeal deadline into the protocol body. Delay must cost more than accepting the verdict at the affected node. Irma's strict appeal deadline pulls memory of a case where dragging the stage let the security services declare the window closed before the harmed node received a copy of the decision. Savannah Archive of Disputed Cases. Delaying appeal turns a neutral verdict into a new conflict. If the deadline isn't material, what's material is only power.
We can give 10 days.
10 days isn't generosity. It's the measurement window while both sides still see one table.
For Irma, the dragged-out appeal case proves what matters isn't calendar generosity but the window where both sides still read one table. That is why a limit on new arguments after the first stage follows for her. Lise traces a finger along the screen edge where an appeal timer sits atop a logistics window, the two scales almost align, and a gap of a couple of hours already looks like a political choice, not margin.
If we leave 10 days unlinked to supply runs and passage slots, parties will start bargaining the calendar, like a separate currency.
Lise overlays supply runs and passage slots on the 10-day span without the link. The calendar becomes a separate currency, not a dispute limit.
We don't hide the link in an appendix. In the protocol, publicly. Appeal window no longer than the supply cycle for the affected node. Otherwise a neat span turns abstract again.
Irma moves the supply cycle link into a public protocol line. The appeal window is no longer than the cycle for the affected node, or the span turns abstract again for the center.
And the start of count tag, not the chair's signature, but first stage publication time in the common register. So mail delay can't be the strong table's argument.
Zel Naga swaps the start of count tag to first stage publication time in the common register. Mail delay can no longer be the strong table's argument against the perimeter.
Publication, yes. And if the first stage arrives with a wrong node ID, resubmit without a penalty to the span, but with a register node. Otherwise a formal typo becomes tactics.
Irma opens a register line for resubmission on a wrong node ID, no penalty to the span, but with a note, or a typo becomes a delay tactic. Zel Naga nods, not fast, as if checking whether the new line breaks balance with Titan and Kelvin outside this hall. The hologram lifts a belt of border stations for a moment, where decision lag once turned into a closed corridor.
Let's also add a limit on new arguments after the first stage. Otherwise the process will turn into an endless debate.
Zel Naga caps new arguments after the first stage, or the two-stage model spreads again into endless polemic dressed as clarifications.
Then the arbitration will not only be neutral, but also procedurally sound.
Irma marks procedural robustness beside neutrality. Arbitration must survive not only political weight at the tables but rhythm failure at the node. Zel Naga leans back, not rest, but a check, whether the corridor they just drew is too narrow for colonies. Lise quietly says 3 words, channel lag, and looks at Irma as if that were already a separate article of the future treaty.
If procedural robustness doesn't survive a calm break, it dies before politics. We need a line on resubmission without penalty when outage is proven. Otherwise, robustness becomes a center privilege again.
Zel Naga writes resubmission without penalty when outage is proven, or robustness becomes a center privilege again for whoever survived the calm break.
We take the line. But then logging the outage isn't, when possible, it's with a timestamp from the common register. Otherwise proof turns into a trust argument.
Irma binds outage logging to the common register's timestamp, not when possible, or proof becomes a trust argument again, not a fact.
And separately, who certifies the outage, not one node. 2 independent signals, as you like to say about external confirmation.
Lise pulls 2 independent outage signals on flanked glass. One node does not certify a break, or the security services will read silence as consent again. Irma marks it in the margin in pencil, next to the phrase procedurally sound. The paper starts pulling engineering honesty, not only legal form. Irma's line about procedural robustness returns her to years when receiving side law and guild charters stacked in one dispute, without a shared verification line. Arbitration became a new form of arbitrariness. Reich Belt, Irma Legal Audit merges placement licensing and corporate guild membership into one incident register.
Guild bylaws allow an exception.
An exception without a public line is not flexibility. It's a signature on the next escalation. A public line is also a limit on us. If an exception stays in guild correspondence, I have no right to call arbitration neutral, for the Reich or for the Empire.
Irma points at the register's public storefront. An exception in guild correspondence strips her right to call arbitration neutral, for the Reich or the Empire.
Then we record honestly. Exception, without a line in the common register, equals denial of exception. No carve-outs for the receiving side table.
Zel Naga writes the rule with no carve-out for the receiving side table. Exception without a line in the common register equals denial, or neutrality becomes correspondence behind a closed door again.
And a separate mark for colonies and perimeters where mail physically cannot arrive in time, otherwise central elegance becomes punishment for the rim.
Lise adds a mark for colonies and perimeters on the lag map. Central elegance of a deadline must not become punishment where mail physically cannot arrive in time.
We enter the mark as a window parameter, not pity. Channel lag is a fact both sides see, not one side's silence excuse.
Irma enters channel lag as a window parameter in the register, a fact for both sides, not pity, and not one contour's excuse for silence. The exception table rustles on the table. Irma strikes 2 rows in a row, too convenient for flexibility without publication. Zel Naga catches herself staring at the hologram's corner timer as if already hearing the next pulse beyond the hall.
Procedural robustness is worth nothing if the COM node dies before the paper arrives. That isn't a lawyer's objection. That's perimeter.
Zel Naga touches a dead COM node on the perimeter schematic. Procedural robustness is worth nothing if paper arrives after the break, and this is not an argument about regulation's beauty.
We take perimeter as a test condition. Then, finality stops being a handsome word. It's measured to the next strike, not to a seal.
Irma moves finality from seal to time to next strike. The perimeter is accepted as a test condition, and the handsome word no longer covers lateness. Lise lowers her voice another half step, not for secrecy, but so the word strike doesn't turn into ornament after long paragraphs about paper.
If we still slide back to calendar prettiness afterward, the colony will show us again the gap between signature time and survival time.
Lise overlays two scales on the colony calendar, signature time and survival time, and the gap between them will teach again if the center returns to handsome dates.
So the next memory line isn't appeal as ceremony. It's whether paper becomes rule before the next pulse.
Zel Naga leaves a memory line on the screen without ceremony, whether paper becomes rule before the next pulse at the node, not before the next speech in the hall. The hall is a fraction quieter than usual. Even the hologram hesitates to lift the next layer until the trio admits arbitration without a live COM node is theater. When Irma closes the appeal logic with a hard deadline and a limit on new arguments after the first stage, Zel Naga remembers the Trasm perimeter, where finality was tested not by the elegance of rules but by whether review windows and signatures landed before the next contour strike. On the colony they argued not about how elegant an appeal looked, but whether review would close on paper before the next pulse of hell.
Two stages only make sense if the COM node is still alive. Otherwise, we aren't arbitration, we're theater.
We don't have 10 days.
Then the deadline isn't a neat calendar span. It's the span to the next control pulse. An honest figure beats an open-ended right.
Zel Naga lets go of the table edge as if pulling a hand back from a perimeter where 10 days can be luxury or mockery depending on whether the node still lives.
I'll keep this as the counterexample to any handsome regulation in the center. Here they don't argue elegance.
Irma closes the process aesthetics block on her pad and keeps only deadlines and publication stamps in the center. Handsome regulation is no longer an argument.
And as a reminder to operations, the red scenario won't wait until we finish quoting ourselves.
Lise nods toward the corridor beyond the glass where a shift training signal flashes. The crisis assessment chart already counts minutes while the hall still recites wording. Behind the glass someone snaps a light strip with a switch, a drill cue for the shift. The sharp click pulls the talk out of italic memory back into metal and plastic. The arbitration scheme on the hologram finally stops shaking from amendment sublayers. A readable frame remains appeal, limit, public line, channel lag mark. Zel Naga runs a hand along the projection edge as if closing a negotiating contour that held on words slightly longer than any real perimeter tolerates.
If we leave the hall without an operational test, all of this stays handsome paper for the first trade window failure.
Lise holds his eyes on the exit clock. Without a body check test, the protocol becomes decoration at the first sync window rupture.
Then the next layer isn't a signature but a scenario. Panic kills a regulation faster than any political strike.
Irma shoves the signature layer aside on the hologram and pulls up a red scenario contour. Panic does not wait for lawyers to close an appeal.
The operations center already waits on a crisis assessment chart. We carry the same first-line rule there. What people downstream read when everything goes wrong.
Zel Naga leads the group into the operations center. The main screen already burns crisis assessment for sync window rupture, the bulletin's first line larger than the report. Beyond the glass, duty silhouettes flicker. The shift nose protocol ended and verification began with bodies. Pace of steps is different, shorter than speech. Irma hesitates on the threshold for a fraction of a second, checking her watch as if still hearing from memory the colony where calendar and pulse argued with no room to step back. Once arbitration logic is assembled and appeal boundaries are closed, focus shifts into the operational plane, where any regulation must survive not debate but real-time failure. The morning cycle begins the practical test. Can the interblock system preserve logistics tempo, decision transparency, and panic control if the synchronization window breaks at peak load? Operations Center. On the screen there is a crisis assessment synchronization window failure scenario. The air here is drier than in the negotiating hall. AC pushes ozone and hot plastic, and 3 time zones glow on the wall: Meridian, Reich, neutral node, as if reminding them the window is one and physical nights are several. The crisis assessment synchronization window failure scenario hooks Bloom to the Blue Lagoon teaching stand. Panic was tied to the first wrong figure in the bulletin, not to shouting. Blue Lagoon. In the early years of her studies, the classroom smells of salt and ozone, and the emergency protocol stand trembles with surf noise. Instructors teach that panic starts not with a scream, but with one inaccurate number in the first bulletin. That is why she now immediately reads market panic risk when a timing window breaks. During graduation practice, she first saw how one broken channel tears supply for an entire coastal sector. Since then, Bloom checks not only the formula of the decision, but also the tempo of its publication.
When everything burns, people read the first line, not a 20-page report.
Then the first line must be honest and checkable.
Bloom's eyes return to the red scenario on the screen. When the window breaks, the market reads the first line before any long report. The bulletin must be shorter than rumor or panic becomes the governor.
If the timing window is missed, the market panics for hours.
Melanie points at the ruptured window band on the board. 3 time zones on the wall remind them panic's clock outruns a long explanation.
This means that branches need not only peace protocol, but also crisis protocol.
Bloom opens a second template on flank glass peace mode beside crisis mode so a branch does not hunt instructions mid-rupture.
3 steps. Instant freezing of the disputed channel, automatic transfer of cargo to a reserve node, joint public bulletin.
Zel Naga chains the 3 steps on screen: freeze, reserve, bulletin, no pause between blocks, console rhythm not appendix rhythm.
Without revealing closed contours.
Melanie touches the sealed closed contour layer. The question is not secrecy for its own sake but sending consequences outward, not the schematic.
Exactly. Transparency of consequences without exposing the architecture.
Zel Naga slides the public bulletin over the sealed map. Rupture figures and the repair node show. Internal contour addresses stay under seal.
Crisis teaches one thing: truth in a hurry must be shorter than rumor.
Melanie trims the bulletin draft to 3 lines. The long report goes to the closed log. Only what can be read before rumor stays on air.
Yes. Let obligation sound in a number, not in a lyrical postscript.
Bloom swaps the template's lyrical postscript for an obligation field with number and unit. The market hears an indicator, not lyric.
The threshold is where courtesy ends and process responsibility begins.
Melanie traces the crisis assessment threshold mark on the scale. Past the line, courtesy does not cancel automatic freeze of the disputed channel.
Then even fright stays inside civilization.
Bloom lights a panic limiter on the board. Fear shows in rupture figures but does not license arbitrary strikes on a neighbor node.
And outward, a short repair brief, not a victory lap, but a map of recovery.
Melanie puts a recovery schematic on the storefront with repair nodes. No victory headline, only the route flow will take again. Melanie's line about a recovery map hooks Bloom back to a Blue Lagoon pier poster where the first chart without a second source turned false hope faster than any storm. Blue Lagoon, a municipal screen, publishes reassuring assessment port status while shops still lack an agreed date line. Bloom learns channel match as a truth condition, not decoration.
Outward, we can call it stable.
Outward, we only publish what matched 2 independent nodes. Otherwise it's advertising, not recovery.
The peer poster memory restates her truth condition. Without a second node, reassuring assessment is advertising. She already hears Melanie's recovery map as 2 checkable channels, not comfort. Bloom runs a finger along the screen edge where an automatic bulletin draft already highlights a reassuring assessment layer, and beside it, thinner, a line that reads awaiting confirmation. Melanie leans closer, the habit of a staff that reads color as an order, not a hypothesis.
If we mix the training case with the live scenario now, tomorrow the market will read reassuring assessment as an order to stay calm.
Melanie pulls the training green layer off the live crisis assessment. Overlay 4 beauty drowns the rupture signal and teaches the market to ignore crisis assessment.
Then we split the layers visually. Crisis assessment is the rupture fact, reassuring assessment only after the second signature. No overlays, for beauty.
Bloom splits 2 non-blending layers on screen. Crisis assessment records rupture. Reassuring assessment lights only after the second signature, a white gap between them, not a gradient.
And leave an empty line in the template that cannot be auto-filled. Blank on the storefront is more honest than painted stability.
Zel Naga blocks autofill on the template's empty line. A white gap stays on the storefront until the second signature arrives from the live log. For a second the screen really shows a white gap between 2 scales, a reminder that a recovery map begins not with comfort but with a hole you must name aloud.
Good. Then the next line about the street isn't about graph aesthetics. It's that people will match 2 channels faster than we can explain.
Bloom nods at the pair of public feeds below the board. The street will match official bulletin and trade ticker before staff finish lecturing on the formula. Melanie nods, barely visible, agreement without heroics, from someone who has already seen a pretty bulletin feed panic. Zel Naga looks away from Bloom to the board. over the red scenario a reassuring assessment recovery storefront from a training case layers in, and for a second she wants to strip the layer so stability propaganda doesn't merge with repair indicators.
On the street they don't ask if the formula is pretty. They ask whether two channels matched and where the repair node is.
Melanie puts two short lines on the storefront: channel match and repair node, no closed contour addresses, no ornament. Melanie's line about two channels and the repair node returns her to a right navigation workshop where a reassuring assessment band almost went on air without a second signature. Overnight hype would have cost more than truth. Right navigation workshop, a training corridor recovery bulletin on the wall. The reassuring assessment band is already painted for the storefront, and the second node line is still empty.
It's prettier for the market. We'll add the second signature later.
Roll it back. On air goes only the draft into the example archive, until there is an awaiting confirmation line with live time.
We'll lose the overnight hype.
Overnight hype is cheaper than a reassuring assessment status without a second node. On the street they read channel match first, not the formula.
Then the bulletin carries not only status but who confirmed second, short, without closed contour addresses.
Bloom adds a second confirmation line with node role, not address. The street sees who made the pair, not a secrets map.
And without another slogan that, we hold the line. Holding it is a number. Not holding it is another number.
Zel Naga strips the slogan from the template and leaves two load figures, holding and not holding read as indicators, not gallery speech. On screen a test insert flashes, an automatic bulletin draft with two node signatures and a third line awaiting confirmation. Melanie flicks the draft into the example archive, not on air. After the crisis protocol is assembled, the headquarters shifts into a durability check mode, cascading emergency chains fill the screen, and the discussion moves from wording to whether the system can absorb sequential shocks without breaking coordination between blocks.
A protocol on paper is worthless if it fails to pass a series of political durability tests.
Bloom switches the center to stress mode. Emergency chains unroll on screen, not another declaration draft.
Then we simulate 3 scenarios in a row: overload, field data failure, and cascading route loss.
Zel Naga runs 3 scenarios in a row on the main board: overload, dead field data, route cascade, no catch your breath pause between hits.
And we check not only the restoration of the flow, but also the quality of communication between headquarters.
Bloom watches the flank HQ comms channel, flow returned, but signal lag between blocks still burns redder than a line break.
Right. Most crises are aggravated not by a breakdown, but by a delayed signal.
Zel Naga marks the timeline gap between breakdown and first align message. That lag inflates panic harder than the fault itself.
If the bundle survives this, the affiliates will have real, rather than declaratory, immunity to panic.
Bloom marks the third hit in a row on the log. Only after a series of failures does the freeze reserve bulletin chain count as immunity, not slogan. Bloom's phrase about declaratory immunity returns her to a Lotus drill series where immunity was tested by consecutive failures until the team confused response speed with meaning. Lotus training cascade, 3 sequential connectivity hits. The instructor won't accept pretty wording until they see a repeatable action chain.
You have a slogan.
Give me a third failure at tempo. If the procedure still holds after that, it's immunity. If not, it's a declaration.
Bloom locks in a criterion she will carry to affiliates. Without a third hit in a row, immunity stays a slogan. Only a repeatable chain after repeated failures separates regime from declaration.